inside world in, if you will, outside world out, so that feces and bacteria and all sorts of things don't have direct access into the bloodstream, but we're able to communicate. We absorb the things we need into the system, and we excrete the things that we don't need. So in someone that has leprosy of their skin, they die because things get into their system, they get infections and they die from it, but they also leak out nutrients and things that they need through their skin. So they're, it's a deadly disease. If you have holes in your GI tract, it's very similar. You have bacteria, you have toxins, you have all sorts of things that now have direct access into our bloodstream and cause us to be very sick. Or we're not able to absorb all the nutrients, or we lose the nutrients that we have inside through this leaky, permeable gut. So the purpose of the intestines is to be a barrier, but there's two important things that you really need to know. Those tight junctions have to be functioning. They have to be tightly glued together to keep those cells from having big holes in them. Zonulin is a protein. It's been recently studied quite well by a physician or a doctor called Alessio Fasano, who's done quite a bit of research on zonulin and has found, particularly in celiacs, that this protein gets released in high amounts in our body when we consume gluten, and it actually unglues those cells. This happens in everybody, not only celiacs. It is a protein that unglues those cells. It just happens more in people with celiac disease. So when you unglue those cells, we now have big open holes for access directly into our bloodstream. Another important thing to understand is that the intestinal lining houses 70% of our entire body's immune system. That's 70% of your entire body's immune system lines your GI tract. So I call those your army guys, and you'll see a picture coming up here in a moment. But if our army guys, 70% of our whole body's immune system is lining the GI tract, and the GI tract has leprosy, it's really busy trying to deal with things that are coming in, and we're not able to really function outside of that area. So we might get sick more frequently. When we get sick, we might get more sick than those around us. We might ultimately develop autoimmunity, where the body's attacking itself, or we might eventually even develop things like cancer, because the body's unable to recognize abnormal cells and cleave them and get rid of them in the body. This is a picture of normal, healthy lining of the GI tract. These are the normal villi and little tiny microvilli. When we have an inflammatory process, something like celiac, we slough off the villi, and we don't have the absorptive capability, and we leak things out, and now we've got big holes for things to get in. So that is leaky gut, and as I mentioned, we've got toxins, we've got yeast, we've got food, we've got all sorts of things in the lumen of the GI tract that now comes through these holes and has direct access into the bloodstream. So for today, we're talking about that trigger being gluten. So we have gluten going into the system, causing an inflammatory response, producing zonulin, which then unglues those tight junctions. Now we have direct access into the bloodstream here. And here's that army guy, 70% of our body's immune system, waiting, ready to fire on whatever breaches that barrier. So this is just a cute little thing to explain autoimmunity. So a few little tidbits. 64% of all adults are overweight or obese, and that number is rapidly rising, and even more quickly rising in pediatric population, which is really sad. Most of the time, a hormonal imbalance is at the root of that. 20 million people in this country have thyroid disease, and 7 to 8% of the entire population has autoimmune thyroid condition, again, body attacking itself, body attacking the thyroid, called Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's is the most common autoimmune condition in the United States. At some point or another, 90% plus of the population will say they're fatigued. And I'm not just talking about, oh, I'm tired today, I'm going to take a nap. I'm talking about a prolonged period of fatigue. That's a lot of people. I think many of you know, because you're here, but just in case you don't, gluten is actually made up of two different protein complexes called gliadin and glutenin. Gliadin is what's found in wheat, rye, spelt, barley, triticale, and other grains that we don't have here today. 30% of Northern Europeans actually carry a gene that makes them more likely to develop celiac disease. The numbers change a little bit, but approximately 1 in 100 people have celiac disease, and about 98 to 99% of them don't know they have it. At least, and I say at least because this number is probably significantly higher than this, but at least 6 to 9% of the population is believed to have some form of gluten sensitivity. This is just what gluten looks like with those two protein complexes together. So this is a really overwhelming slide. I don't want you to be overwhelmed, but we're going to get into the hormone piece of this picture. What I want you to know from here, this is steroid hormone pathway. Cholesterol is the building block of all of our steroid hormones. And many of you, I'm sure, hear all sorts of bad things about cholesterol. We need to lower our cholesterol. It's too high. We need to be on a statin and drive that number really low. But you need to understand that if we don't have adequate amounts of cholesterol, we won't be able to make hormones that are necessary for life. I tell my patients that the lowest I want to see their total cholesterol number is 160. Okay? So some people just don't eat, we talk about having a low-fat diet and not having adequate fats. You need healthy, good fats in your diet in order to have good, healthy hormones. Okay? So what ends up happening is cholesterol goes down two different pathways. We either have our stress hormone pathway or we have our sex hormone pathway. Under our sex hormones, we have DHEA, we've got some male hormones, testosterone, and estrogens actually come from male hormones. So both men and women have testosterone and estrogen. These sex hormones are not necessary for life. Now, a woman may have her ovaries removed, a man may have his testicles removed, and they may feel like they're going to die, but they're not going to die. Whereas this hormone over here that we'll be spending some time on, cortisol, is stress hormone, is necessary for life. That hormone is made in your adrenal glands, which is a small gland that sits on top of your kidneys. If you don't make cortisol, you die. It's your fight or flight hormone. It's the hormone that allows you to deal with your environment. So cortisol starts out at its highest in the morning so that you have energy. You wake up, you feel good, and throughout the day it should normally fall to its lowest so that when you go to bed at night, you're ready to go to bed and that hormone's, at its lowest point. If you have a stressful event, remember it's a stress hormone, so if you get in an argument with somebody or you almost get in a car accident or you stub your toe, that hormone's going to be released, but should be short-term and come back down to normal. Okay. So the takeaway from this slide, remember you need good cholesterol to make hormones. Stress hormone, cortisol, is necessary for life. You die without it. There is an autoimmune condition. Most of the time it's autoimmune. There are other causes for it, but a disease called Addison's disease, where your body does not make cortisol. Those people required steroid hormone the rest of their life just to survive. Okay? And the other takeaway is that your sex hormones are not necessary for life. Whenever anybody hears me talk about stress, or when you go to your doctor and they say, well, how do you feel? We all think about our emotional part of this. And I want you to understand that the body doesn't differentiate between different types of stress. And there are a lot of types of stress. We have mental, emotional, certainly, work is hard, you have hard relationships in your life. All of those things are a stressor to the body. But so is your diet, so is the lifestyle you lead. So if you don't get adequate sleep, If you eat a diet that, even though it looks good, my diet of whole grains and fresh fruit was a stressor to my body. Certainly McDonald's on a regular basis, if that makes up the majority of your food, is a stressor to the body. If you have food allergies, food sensitivities, intestinal permeability, and food proteins are getting in, those are stressors to your body. And pain and inflammation. If you get in a car accident, fall down a flight of steps, or if you have chronic pain like fibromyalgia, those are all chronic stressors. And any stress to the body makes your body release cortisol. So it doesn't matter, like I said, if you have just emotional stressors or dietary or pain or inflammation. People can say, I'm the most zen person I know. I don't have any stress. I feel great. And their body can be under a tremendous amount of stress because of their diet and perhaps not getting adequate sleep. So when cortisol is necessary for life. It's our fight or flight hormone. It's that hormone. This guy's being chased by a tiger. It's that hormone that's going to keep you running and allow you to function properly. Unfortunately, instead of most of us being high in the morning and go through the day and we're low by the end of the evening, most of us are up here all day long. But this hormone isn't a bad hormone. It does good things. If you're being chased by a tiger, you want your blood sugar to be elevated so that your muscles are going to get the sugar they need to survive. You want your brain to be focused on running from a tiger and not thinking or doing anything else. If you are being chased by a tiger and you get bitten by a tiger, you don't want to bleed to death. So it increases our ability to clot, which in the short term is a good thing, not good long term. It suppresses our immune system because, again, we're being chased by a tiger. We don't need to worry about an infection we may get a month from now. It also conserves salt because if you're running from a tiger, you want to not get dehydrated. You want to maintain your blood pressure. It uses any form of fuel for energy. So we use protein if that's the only energy form around. And it also requires a lot of calcium to make energy. So the need for calcium goes up. So it's not a bad hormone if it's being appropriately produced and used. But prolonged elevations in cortisol result in the body taking every calorie we eat and converting it into fat because fat burns more energy. So we tend to get, when we have prolonged periods of time where our cortisol levels are high, tend to see excess belly fat, body fat in the belly. We have changes in blood pressure, typically high blood pressure because we're conserving more sodium. Like I said, we didn't want to get dehydrated. We start to get atrophy of our muscles, so we get belly fat, but we're getting less muscle mass because we're breaking down muscles in order to use it for fuel. People develop osteopenia or osteoporosis because we pull calcium out of our bones in order to make energy. Long-term suppression of the immune system leads to infections, allergies, cancer, all sorts of bad things, autoimmunity. If our brain's not really functioning the way it should because we're being chased by a tiger, we have memory loss, brain fog, ultimately depression. And we can also develop things like insulin resistance and ultimately type 2 diabetes. So after periods of prolonged cortisol elevation, cortisol levels do become depleted. And we will talk more about what that looks like for your adrenal glands in a moment. But cortisol depletion also has a lot of the same things that we just talked about, but the depression you get is a more severe depression. You can see postpartum depression because pregnancy is a stressor to the body. Severe fatigue, chronic fatigue syndrome, body aches and pains leading to fibromyalgia in certain patients. Blood pressure abnormalities, I told you that in prolonged cortisol elevations, typically it's high, but you can have very labile blood pressures where they're up and down all over the place. You stand up and your blood pressure falls, or even be hypotensive where it's quite low. You can have inflammation in the body, allergies, infection, cancer in this situation as well. And I have patients that have no signs of menopause, and all of a sudden after run their whole life, all of a sudden have this incredibly stressful event, which kind of is that extra drop that overflows their flower pot, and they go into acute menopause. And they had no signs of it before. Andropause is what we call sort of the male hormones falling. So these are just three phases of what some people call adrenal fatigue, adrenal exhaustion. Remember, adrenal glands is where your cortisol, your stress hormone, is made. So for today, we're just going to call it adrenal fatigue. This is a woman who's tired and irritated, the man who can't stay awake at work and has to drink a bunch of coffee, woman who's exhausted but has insomnia and can't fall asleep at night. It is estimated that 80% of the population is in some degree of adrenal fatigue. In my office, I test my patients for adrenal fatigue, and I use a 4-point cortisol saliva panel. As I told you, this green line, this green area, shaded area, is where your 4 points should be. We measure first thing in the morning, around lunchtime, mid-afternoon, and then sometime between 10 and midnight. And we get a nice curve. So right in the middle of where we should be in this green shaded area is ideal, and kind of following down like this pattern does, highest in the morning, falls throughout the day, and by nighttime, we're ready to go to bed. So stage 1, adrenal fatigue. This is that mama 5, ER doc, run. Okay, we have the same nice pattern here, except now we're high. We're in the yellow. We're not off the charts high, although we could be here, but we're high, and this person doesn't notice that they have an issue. They're high energy, go, gotta get everything done. And at night, guess what? Kids are in bed. Oh, I have work to do. I can't fall asleep. And my cortisol level is high. Again, this person doesn't feel bad, doesn't feel sick, may feel like I need more sleep, but it's all right. I have a lot of energy. I'll get what I need to get done after the kids are in bed. Stage 2 adrenal fatigue I call wired but tired. Okay, so you're awake part of the day, kind of really sleepy. This is that person who probably requires lots of coffee in the morning to get themselves going. As you can see, we were high before. Now in the morning, we're on the low side. So we need some coffee to get ourselves up and ready and going. By lunchtime, we're right about probably where we should be. By 6 o'clock, 5, it's that witching hour. You've got to make, I'm a female, so I'm, getting kids off the bus, making dinner, whatever it may be. And, but this is that kind of, could be the crabby time, wired but crabby, which certainly has happened in my own life. And then by bedtime you crash. It could be any number of things, but it's the point is the stage 2 is not a normal pattern. And again, this person doesn't really know they're sick. They know they're tired. They know they're more irritable or crabby, but they don't feel sick. They wouldn't necessarily go to the doctor over it. Stage 3, adrenal fatigue or exhaustion. As you can see, it's almost a flat line. This is what someone, that has Addison's disease or really, this is a potentially life-threatening situation. This person's blood pressure may be very unstable, and this person probably needs some steroids just to function. Okay? So how quickly you go through the stages is variable, but it can be quite rapid where you go from stage 2 to stage 3. This is what happens to a woman's body with prolonged cortisol levels and, eventually to the point where we're depleting the adrenal glands. As you can see, just the body habits. This is no change in diet. So I don't know if any of you experienced that or not, but you feel like you're eating all the right and same things that you always did before, but all of a sudden you start putting on weight around the middle, and then more weight. And then by this point, you can't exercise because you're exhausted and you have quite a bit of excess body fat. So I thought this was cute. I'm not sure if all of you could see it. It says, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, a daughter, an executive, a cook, a housekeeper, a teacher, a chauffeur, and a soccer coach. That's only 19 pounds per woman. So back to that hormone pathway a little bit. Remember, cholesterol is that building block for your stress hormone and your sex hormone. So normally cholesterol splits and makes both of these hormones. And as I told you, cortisol is essential for life and sex hormones are not essential for life. So when I liken this to putting money in the, to putting money in the bank and taking money out of the bank. If your cortisol levels, your bank account, and it's necessary for life, and you keep taking money out because your cortisol levels are high and up here all day long, we're just taking money out, taking money out, and we're not replenishing the bank account. Over time, we're not going to have enough money to keep up. So we develop adrenal fatigue and eventually adrenal exhaustion. But before we get there, what the body does, because these are not essential for life, the body does something called cortisol steal. Some people call it pregnenolone steal, that's here, or progesterone steal, but most people refer to it as a cortisol steal. And what does that mean? What ends up happening is instead of the body making normal sex hormones, the body stops doing that because it knows it doesn't need to look good and have sex. It needs to survive. So it stops making those hormones and we make stress hormone just to survive. So what we end up with is too little estrogen and too little testosterone. And signs of too little estrogen are decreased sex drive. We end up with infertility, we end up with brain fog, we end up with weight gain, all sorts of sexual dysfunction, dry skin, fragile skin, fatigue, signs of perimenopause or menopause, night sweats, hot flashes, those sorts of things, difficulty concentrating, hair loss, and signs of too little testosterone. This is the person who's normally working out and goes to the gym and feels like they can't even continue doing their same level of activity. They don't have the same muscle mass. They have decreased strength, decreased endurance. They have also sexual dysfunction. There is male infertility as well that can happen. Men as well can get depressed, gain weight. And for men, it's typically hair loss that they get. And in women, we can get hair in unwanted places when we have abnormalities in testosterone. Men can also have testicular shrinkage and have insulin resistance, which ultimately leads to type 2 diabetes, which you have in men or women. So this is what chronic stress and low testosterone look like in a man. Again, not changing his diet, not necessarily changing activity level, looks very similar to the woman. Starts to gain a lot of weight right in the middle area. So we're going to move on and talk a little bit now about hypothyroidism. And as I mentioned, 20 million Americans have some form of thyroid disease. 60% of them are unaware that they have any disease at all. And 90% of all people with thyroid disease have Hashimoto's or antibodies to their thyroid. It's the most common autoimmune condition in the US, so 7 to 8% of the entire population has it. I'm just going to make a comment about thyroid hormone levels. I have a lot of patients that come into my office and say, well, my doctor said my thyroid test was normal. So I look at lab reference ranges in my office a little bit differently than I used to when I was practicing traditional medicine. I told you I'm a visual person, so I'm going to describe it in a word picture. If I go to buy a pair of socks, I buy a size 4 to 9 ladies pair of socks, but I wear a size 8 shoe. But we stretch our socks to fit the vast majority of the population. We do the same thing with labs, and we're basing it off of the US population, which isn't necessarily the healthiest population. We say TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, the most commonly ordered. I order several other hormone tests for my thyroid patients, but if we just start with that one, a typical reference range is 0.5 to 5.5. Well, most people feel best around a TSH of 0.5 to 1.5. So there's a much narrower therapeutic window than what's available on the testing. So if you're a doctor and you get your lab steroid is one of the most commonly prescribed medications. It's a pharmaceutical thyroid replacement medication. And just of interest, every single cell in your body has receptors for thyroid hormone. So it is an incredibly important hormone for your body. It is our powerhouse generator. It's what helps our metabolism function. Symptoms of hypothyroidism, many of you might be familiar with this, is commonly cold intolerance. You can't, everybody else is comfortable, but you're freezing in the room. You've got cold hands, cold feet, weight gain, hair loss, eyebrow hair loss, typically lateral eyebrows. You can have depression, you can have swelling, what we would call edema or fluid retention, body temperature. Often people will measure body temperature in the morning as a way of gauging how well their thyroid is functioning, and often it's low if you're hypothyroid. It can cause infertility and fatigue as well as menstrual irregularities. So what is the gluten-thyroid connection? It's really a case of mistaken identity in this case. Gliadin is that protein in gluten that closely resembles the thyroid gland. So what ends up happening is we eat something that has gluten in it, or gliadin in it. Okay? And we have an intestinal permeability that I mentioned before. That gliadin gets through. Our army guys, our 70% of our immune system is waiting there for something to get through and reach that barrier. The army guy recognizes it as foreign and then scours the body for any foreign invaders that look like it that got through. Well, the thyroid gland tissue has a very similar makeup to that of gliadin. So as do joints and as does your pancreas. So Hashimoto's autoimmune thyroid condition is associated with gluten because once that gluten gets through, the army guys recognize it, the body finds other areas that look like gluten and attacks it. That also leads to rheumatoid arthritis, which is associated with it as well because the body makes the joints look a lot like gliadin, as does the pancreas, which is associated with type 1 diabetes, which we'll be speaking about as well. So I call this friendly fire. The body attacks itself. Those army guys start attacking the thyroid gland. We also talked about stress, and that stress hormone cortisol impacting our sex hormones. And this is a totally different hormone pathway. Thyroid is not a steroid hormone, but it is another hormone that is impacted by one of our stress hormones. Cortisol actually decreases the production of thyroid, and it decreases the conversion of thyroid hormone from the form that's made in our thyroid to the form that our body actually uses in the cells. So just stress, remember all different types of stress, not just emotional stress, impact our thyroid function. There are other reasons that we can be hypothyroid as well that's related to gluten, but is not autoimmune. Our body needs certain nutrients in order to make thyroid hormone. And those nutrients have to be absorbed by the GI tract in order to make it. We need selenium, we need zinc, we need iodine, we need B vitamins, we need vitamin C. And you need an intact GI tract in order to absorb those vitamins. Here are just some other organs that are impacted by autoimmune disease, specifically gluten-related autoimmune disease. So you can have autoimmune disease to the brain, as we discussed, thyroid, but to the bone, pancreas, we'll be talking in a moment. You can have autoimmune liver disease, heart disease, certainly celiac disease, which many of you know about already. To the joints, I mentioned rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease to your joints. You can have autoimmune disease to our sex organs as well. Insulin is another hormone, and it is produced by this organ, the pancreas, that sits under our stomach. So when we eat a normal meal, that meal is digested, and some of that food is converted into sugar, which is called glucose. That glucose then goes into our bloodstream and signals the pancreas to make insulin, because our cells need glucose inside the cells, and insulin is what helps get the glucose into the cells. So in a normal healthy person, glucose gets elevated, tells the pancreas makes some insulin, insulin is produced, and helps drive the sugar into the cells to give the cells the fuel that they need to survive. In type 1 diabetes, this is an autoimmune condition, again, the body attacking itself, and the body is attacking the pancreas here. The cells that make insulin get attacked. So in type 1 diabetes, we either don't have enough insulin or we make none at all. So when we eat a meal, we make glucose, which goes into the bloodstream, signals the pancreas to make insulin, but guess what? There's no insulin or not enough there produced. So the blood sugar is really high. That's what happens in diabetes. Blood sugar is high. But inside the cells, the person's starving because they're not getting the sugar in the cells where it needs it. 8% of type 1 diabetics also have associated celiac disease. An important thing to mention here as well is one autoimmune disease begets another. If you have one condition where your body's attacking itself in one place, you likely will at some point in your life, if you don't already, develop another autoimmune condition if you don't address underlying root issues. Sometimes we can measure those things like rheumatoid arthritis. There's a lot of organs that can be attacked where we don't have an exact way of measuring them. But it is important to keep in mind that if you already have an autoimmune disease, it's likely that you may have another right now or certainly may in the future. Insulin resistance ultimately leads to type 2 diabetes. This is not an autoimmune condition. Type 1 diabetes we typically see in children. Can happen later in life, but it's typically in children. Type 2 diabetes is really a lifestyle dietary problem that we typically see in adulthood. And this is a malfunctioning of insulin receptor. So we eat our food, it's converted to sugar. Sugar tells, we have that high blood sugar, tells the pancreas, hey, I need insulin. The pancreas makes insulin and makes adequate amounts of insulin, but the cells themselves, the receptors on the cells, don't really get the signal. They don't hear the signal anymore. So blood sugar is high. We don't get as much sugar into the cells as we should. We probably get a little. So the pancreas ends up having to scream at the body, I call it screaming, by producing a whole bunch of insulin to try to drive sugar in. So what we end up having when we measure the blood is we have high blood sugar, but we also have really high insulin levels because it's trying to force that sugar into the cells. This is not autoimmune, but how is it associated with gluten? Well, it's causing malfunctioning insulin receptors, which are a result of inflammation and immune dysfunction, as well as obesity. Genetics do play a role. They play a role in all of our disease. Probably about 15% of all diseases related to genetics. But we can impact our genetics. Just because your genes are there, that everybody in your family has diabetes, doesn't mean you will. You can change the way your genetics or your genes express themselves by making diet and lifestyle changes. But particularly gluten, as we mentioned, really can cause an inflammatory response and hormone and therefore immune dysfunction. You may not have any issue with gluten whatsoever. You may not have any gluten sensitivity or any autoimmune condition whatsoever. But eating 2 slices of multi-grain bread is like eating 6 teaspoons of sugar to your body. So just keep that in mind. So that's a lot of information on hormones. I just thought this was kind of silly and funny, so I put it in here after going through all that serious stuff. It says, okay, so maybe it wasn't such a good idea to buy your estrogen pills off the internet after all. This man talking to his very hairy wife. So what do we do now? I've talked to you about gluten's impact. What are we going to do about protecting our organs that make hormones and getting back to optimal health, which is really my goal in my practice. practice is to help my patients achieve optimal wellness. So certainly we want to eliminate gluten and other things that could be irritating the GI tract, like allergens, toxins, other stressors which are going to cause intestinal permeability. We want to heal the lining of the GI tract, and there's lots of things that can be given, that you can take, that you can do to heal the lining of the GI tract. You want to make sure you have a diet that's full of healthy phytonutrients, which we get through vegetables. So I tell all of my patients to make sure they eat on a daily basis every color of the rainbow. Keep a food journal. Write down what you've eaten. A lot of people are good at having salad every day, but it's spinach and it's one color in there. So try to write down all that you eat for a week and have an idea where perhaps you're missing certain phytonutrients. Cruciferous vegetables in particular, which are things like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, are really good at helping us detox certain parts of our hormones that we don't want hanging around. B vitamins, magnesium and vitamin C in particular are necessary for good adrenal health. Adrenals where your stress hormones made. And then we need zinc, iron, iodine, selenium in addition to those other vitamins in order to make healthy thyroid hormone. So you want to make sure you've got a decent multivitamin and multi-mineral thing in addition to eating healthy. I also recommend that my patients eat or add into their diet some flaxseed and chia seeds, which also provide some essential omega-3 acids and provide some detox support as well. Adaptogenic herbs is one of the things I really try to start with my patients. Adaptogenic herbs means they help us adapt. When our stress hormones are too low or our stress hormone levels are too high, it helps bring them back into balance. Those herbs would be something like ashwagandha, rhodiola, and I have in my office a product or a couple of products that combine several together. I prefer to do that before we start adding in a bunch of hormones. However, sometimes people come to me and need hormones in addition to doing all these things because they're sick. So I do also replace hormones in my office. I do a lot of bioidentical hormone replacement, whether that's sex hormones, but also with thyroid hormone. We compound thyroid hormone and lots of other hormonal deficiencies. And something that's just as an aside, we call vitamin D a vitamin, but it really is a hormone. It acts like a hormone in our body, and it's a really important one. It's particularly important for keeping the lining of the GI tract in health, in perfect health, and decreasing intestinal permeability, but it's also important in terms of decreasing your risk of cancer. So I would recommend that you get a vitamin D level checked and treat if it's low. That's one of those sock-sized reference ranges, vitamin D level 30 to 100. It's really long, really wide reference range. Ideally, the literature probably says, and this changes, but I like somewhere between 60 and 80 for my patients. I talked to you about healing the gut. I use a 5R approach to heal the gut in my patients. You have to remove the things that are irritating and causing a problem to the lining of the GI tract. So toxins, foods, medications, pesticides, bad bugs that you might have growing in your GI tract. You've got to get rid of them. And then we want to replace those things that are necessary. We want to replace the nutrients we need. We might need digestive enzymes. We might need hydrochloric acid to break foods down. And we also probably need good fiber. If you're eating all the colors of the rainbow, by the end of the day, you'll be getting adequate fiber. We want to re-inoculate. You need to take probiotics on a regular basis. If you don't want to take probiotics, you have to eat lacto-fermented vegetables. Lacto-fermented vegetables are things like sauerkraut and not out of a can. They have to be ones that are made without vinegar and made appropriately. You can Google that and research that. Those bacteria in our GI tract need to be replaced on a regular basis. We have over 100 trillion organisms that live in the GI tract. We only have 10 trillion cells in the whole body. So in order for us to be in charge, I say it's like a scary Alfred Hitchcock movie. You know, those bugs can take over unless we keep them in control. We've got to have the right balance of good bugs. There's a lot of research and literature coming out about what's growing in our GI tract being associated with lots of different diseases. So people talk to me about yogurt. I'm not a dairy fan, which is a whole nother subject. So I highly recommend that you look into fermenting your own vegetables or buying something locally fermented by you, in addition to adding in some probiotics on a daily basis. Then we've got to repair the lining of the GI tract. There are lots of things that we can do. Amino acid like glutamine, there's aloe, there's zinc carnosine, vitamin D is necessary to help heal the lining of the GI tract, and certain other nutrients may be necessary as well. Lastly, that fifth R is rebalance. So we talked about all three types of stress. So you've got the dietary and lifestyle, which we spent quite a bit on the diet today. We've got pain and inflammation that you know about, but you also have to keep in mind the emotional piece of it. You could do the best diet in the world, you could have a great exercise program, and you could have really bad relationships or a really stressful job, and that also causes a lot of stress and damage to your body. So we've got to take care of the whole picture. I wrote in here, I didn't talk about exercise during this, but that's obviously really important as well. So I wrote, what fits your busy schedule better? Exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? So it is really important to exercise. Some of my most unhealthy patients are my professional athletes. There's balance. As I said earlier, balance is the key to life. You've got to exercise to be healthy, but you just want to keep it in balance. And lastly, what I'll say is I found this an interesting article. This is actually from 2009, but 30,000 patients were looked at, and there was a 39% increased risk of death in those patients that had celiac disease, 35% increased risk of death in those with gluten sensitivity but no celiac disease, and 72% increased risk of death in those that had gut inflammation related to gluten. I don't think I have time for questions, but I am here today okay, I've got a couple minutes, it looks like. I am around the corner at booth 126 if I don't happen to get to your question. And that's also my information. My medical practice is in downtown Carmel, and I see all ages, and I see patients who are well or feel like they're well and just want to age gracefully. And then I have patients who got lots of diseases we talked about today, but also patients with metastatic cancer and all sorts of other health concerns. Thank you. Does anybody have a question? I think I have like 1 minute or 2 minutes here. Yes. I can't hear you. Okay, so it really depends on what your vitamin D level is to begin with. In Indiana, it depends where you live. So if you're near the equator, you don't need as much vitamin D because theoretically, if you're outside sun, we should be getting our vitamin D through sun. Okay, but we're all putting sunscreen on and trying to keep ourselves from getting skin cancer. So it really depends. In Indiana, I'll tell you, all of my patients that come in that aren't taking it are deficient because we live too far above the equator. Even those people that work outside and do landscaping or painting or other things like that, every one of them has been deficient. So in Indiana, you need at least 2,000 to 4,000 IUs of vitamin D just to maintain an adequate vitamin D level. So it just depends on where you are to start with for me to be able to make a recommendation for you. Yes? Okay, so the question was, do I use Armour, which is a glandular, porcine glandular thyroid, or do I use a compounded? I don't particularly like Armour because it's made with cornstarch, and corn is genetically modified. So when I use a glandular, I use Nature-Throid or Westroid. It's Nature-Throid. It does not have any corn in it. But if you have an autoimmune thyroid condition, it would be best to not use a gland that you might have another autoimmune condition to. So I do compound thyroid hormone for my patients with autoimmune disease. I think I'm out of time, but I'd be happy to answer any additional questions around the